Hey everyone, welcome back to episode number 23 of the High Frequency Podcast. Thank you to everyone who listened to the podcast update last month. Look, I know it wasn't the most exciting episode in the world, but it needed to be done. I needed to explain why I'd been absent. I needed to explain the future of the podcast and a few of the other little details as well. So thank you to those who listened. Thanks to those who gave me some feedback. I really appreciate it. We've got a cool community of people that listen to this podcast. And for those who want to support the podcast, you can do so by clicking on the Patreon link in the description of this podcast if you're listening to it. And if you're watching it on YouTube, you can find it in the description of the YouTube video. So thank you to those who have supported the podcast so far. It's greatly appreciated. Today's guest, Dilby, is a DJ and producer originally from New Zealand. He actually moved to Berlin in 2012, where he quickly rose through the ranks to become a regular favourite in the top house and techno clubs in Berlin. In recent years, Dilby's global recognition has seen him develop an in-demand DJ schedule, touring across Europe, South America, Central America and Australasia. His music is crafted from a classic house and melodic techno palette, but presented with a fresh modern twist. His sound is rich, warm and musical, but aimed primarily at the dance floor. His music is a mainstay at the top of the Beatport charts, where he is amongst one of the highest selling artists in the deep house charts, and his sound sees him featured on some of the scene's most iconic and respected labels, as well as an in-demand remixer. Dilby's passion and enthusiasm for electronic music is very evident, especially from our conversation today. It was a really insightful conversation, and I really respect this guy. He's made a career out of his passion, and not a lot of people can say that they've done that. So big props to Dilby, and I really enjoyed the chat that we had today. Please bear in mind that when listening to this episode, it's not being recorded with the microphone that I'm currently using to record this intro. When I was editing the episode, it was very evident that Dilby's sound quality and audio quality far surpassed mine, and it was a little bit embarrassing if I'm honest with you. So I asked him what microphone he used, and he gave me some tips and some ideas, so I went out and bought the same microphone. So the audio quality will have improved, hopefully, significantly on my part. Obviously, I don't talk a hell of a lot in these episodes. These are more so about the guests, so it's not paramount that the quality of audio is really high on my end, but I felt like it was necessary. So please do bear that in mind when you are listening to the episode. And for those that are watching it, you can see that obviously I have a setup behind me and new lighting, etc. for the podcast. I've purchased all this and implemented it subsequent to recording the episode with Dilby. So you can see from my video the video quality and the setting is again subpar in comparison to his. So please do bear that in mind. And without further ado, let's hop straight into the episode with Dilby. Okay, Dilby, welcome to the High Frequency Podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, mate. It's good to be here.
Yeah. It's been a long time, man. We met each other a long time ago in Wellington, which I'm keen to dive into. But we also met each other recently at Shipwrecked, which was nice to see you and awesome to see you play. How did the tour go?
It was really cool, man. I mean, touring can be complicated, and this one wasn't without its complications.
Sure.
Won't go into that too much, but had some really good shows, great shows in Australia, and then some really cool shows in New Zealand. Shipwrecked being like a personal highlight. Like, it's so cool to see what Logan's built there. Such a fun party, to be honest. Like, really good.
Did you think this year was better than last year?
I would say it was consistent. Yeah.
Because I've never actually been to Shipwreck before. This was my first time, and luckily enough was able to play as well. But I really think Logan's got the right idea there. I haven't been to many parties in New Zealand where people just seem to get it. Like that entire main stage, people really got it, and it was really nice and refreshing to see.
Yeah, they've done a great job. I think, from what I've heard, there weren't quite as many people as they'd hoped for this year. It didn't feel different. Like, it didn't feel like there were less people this year, but I think there were more people last year. And I think that's to do with like setting the ticket prices. And I heard feedback from a few people that they felt like the ticket prices were maybe a bit high. I'd I guess as a promoter, that's a bit of a gamble that you've got to take. You kind of like want to cover your costs, so maximizing your revenue, but at the same time, you don't want to price out your audience. So I think it's there's a bit of business know-how that comes into that, and it's always a bit of a gamble, I suppose.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I'm no businessman, but I guess it's probably quite difficult to price these things when the economy's currently in the tank, which is
Well,
nothing.
I mean,
It's outside of
it's a
Wales.
complicated time because for like any industry, like supplier costs are going through the roof, but the disposable income of your customer is plummeting. So it's like if you want to actually, I mean, I don't think their goal is to buy a mansion or something from this. I think ideally they'd love to break even. I mean, you've had Logan on the podcast before, and it's been a tumultuous journey for him, let's say.
Yeah,
Yeah,
to say the least, I reckon.
yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I love where Logan's heart is. I think his heart is so much in the community and the music and what he's built and all the gigs that he attends and silent studios, that he's just got everything in the right place. But I just wish he could make some money on it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's New Zealand it's kind of a little bit hamstrung by the size of the population. I mean, I'm in Berlin. It's not a huge city, but it's the population of the city I live in is almost the population of New Zealand, and that's in like a small geographic area. So it makes a difference for any industry. Like, shit, I don't want to get this to be too like business focused, but just like it's something that I realized since I've been here. Years ago, when I was living in Wellington, I started like a small independent clothing label, and that was so difficult in New Zealand, just because the size of your market, your potential customer base is so small, and I think that's the same for any industry that you go into, unless it's maybe, I mean, no, any industry, even if you're doing something on some big industrial scale, the number of people in that industry is just going to be smaller than in another place, whether that's Australia, Europe, the United States, anywhere,
Yeah, I completely agree, man. And obviously, I'm not from New Zealand. I've lived here a long time now, but I think my listeners will probably get sick of hearing me say this. But when I first moved over here, I couldn't quite grasp the difference in population. I couldn't quite get my head around everything on a smaller scale. It was kind of strange. It was quite endearing in a way. It was quite like, oh, New Zealand's quite cute. I quite like it here, and obviously I ended up staying. But as I've kind of gone along on this music journey within the industry here, it is very, very difficult. And I respect all the people that do put shows on in this country and all the promoters that manage to make it work, because it's a bloody hard job getting people to gigs in this country.
100%.
But I mean, Dylan, you're obviously from New Zealand in the first place. Remind me what year you moved to Berlin?
2012.
2012.
Yeah.
Okay, because I don't think the listeners will remember, but I did a podcast with Matt Empire a couple of years ago.
Yep.
Matt's the guy who we were both doing something similar in Wellington. We both had a residency at Mayor. And then there was obviously yourself and Vernon and Wade and Stu and a couple of others that all had their own little things going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we obviously played a gig together that I think Matt invited you along to. A bit of a fail of a gig, but it was, I think we had the best intentions.
Yep.
And back then I really did feel like there was enough venues to go around. But I mean, tell me your journey, Dylan, because you've obviously gone from strength to strength, moving to Berlin, and it was obviously a conscious choice. So how did you get started in this thing? And I'm talking like way back in Wellington. Tell us a bit about Mikasa Sukasa, and then obviously your decision to move to Berlin.
Right. I mean, if you want me to start from the start, the way I got into electronic music was I grew up in Nelson, small town at the top of the South Island. I'm not even sure what the population is, but it's pretty small. No clubs or anything to speak of. And when I was growing up, when I was in high school and stuff, I was a skateboarder. I listened to hip hop. I thought electronic music was pretty fucking lame, to be honest. But on New Year's Eve, there was this festival on the top of the Takaka Hill called The Gathering. And we would go to that because it was like the biggest, best thing going on. I didn't really give a shit about the music. I just went there to like get wasted and talk to girls, as you do. But like over the years of going to that, I think I went to my first one when I was maybe 15 or 16. By the time I'd finished high school, I definitely was a bit more connected to the music. And then after high school, I moved to Auckland to study and stuff, and there got into more clubbing, house music kind of thing, and then continued to go for a couple of years to The Gathering until it stopped. They stopped putting it on, went out of business or something, I guess. But that was really my entrance into it. So I guess moving away from Nelson and having more, like experiencing the Auckland club scene really kind of ignited the passion and kind of flipped the whole thing for me. A friend of mine I was living with from Nelson, shout out Scrapes. He'd been like DJing for years and had turntables and started teaching me to mix. And I started buying vinyl and teaching myself to mix. And yeah, so I kind of lived in Auckland for a few more years, playing the odd gig here and there. But I was quite young. I was 20 and not living in a big city, coming from a small town. I kind of felt I felt difficult to make connections. I think I was just shy and whatever, but I had some good friends there. We did some cool parties, but I never really pushed myself to get into the scene as it was. I then moved to Wellington and made some good connections there, played a few gigs, but the scene was much smaller. And at this time, I guess this would have been around 2004, 2005, the scene in New Zealand in general for like house and techno music was definitely in a downturn. Like when I was in Auckland, there'd be events like Global Underground would do tours with like Steve Lawler or Nick Warren or whatever, and there'd be 3,000 people going to these shows, and that would be like on the same night you'd go down K Road and there'd be, I don't know, 10, 20 clubs with lines out the door. There were just people were just going out. It was amazing, and that was what really inspired me so much. It made me kind of fall in love with the scene and house music and that. And I went to Wellington, and the scene was a lot smaller. And I think, in general, the whole scene in New Zealand was contracting. So it was like it felt easier to make contacts in Wellington, which was great. But there was like less opportunity to play. So I played like the odd gig here and there for a while, and things just kind of got smaller and smaller. And then I took a few years off of electronic music. I just kind of like fell out of, maybe from like 2005 to around 2009, I got back into it. I guess I kind of missed the whole era when like electro house was really big, which maybe I kind of dodged a bullet there. And then around 2009, I kind of got back into it and started DJing again, just at home, and then got into writing music. And yeah, it kind of went from there. So then I was in Wellington. The scene had really shrunk. There used to be a really cool club called Sandwiches, which would do great shows. But they, like, I guess like drum and bass had really taken over. So house and techno was a really small niche at that time. There were still people putting on shows and doing like local club nights. But what I felt like was that the scene was like too small to have competition. But all of the people that were putting on events and things were competing with each other. Like they weren't communicating. They were keeping things secret. Like announcing things last minute, not taking into consideration whether someone else had a party on the same night. So you'd get like a bunch of things happening sporadically, which were pretty empty, which doesn't really help like foster a new audience, like getting people into the scene. Because if they go along and their first experience of going to a house and techno night is that there's like 25 people in a club that holds 200 or something, it's not going to be amazing for them, and they're probably not going to come back. So Vernon and I started, like, put our heads together and decided we wanted to come up with a night with the concept of like uniting some of these people. So our, like, the concept for our night, which we called Mi Casa Su Casa, which I've come to learn is bad Spanish for my house is your house, was the concept was like we would be like the residents, and then we would get two guests each month from different kind of crews of people, so that they could like get to know each other, become aware of each other, communicate, hopefully create a friendship. And that, like, our whole goal with it was to actually kind of grow the scene and create a bit more unity with it. I don't know how well we succeeded with that, but you know, we had, like, I feel like pretty good intentions. And then yeah, we kind of, I think we did that for a couple of years at least, over across a did we do a couple of different venues? Yeah, we put on some nights. We did some
Ponderosa, wasn't it? Ponderosa?
It was at Betty's.
Betty's, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, that's next door to Ponderosa.
Yeah. But we did some other nights at like Sandwiches, and some other nights at some other venues. We had some like international guests and stuff, which was cool. But yeah, it was a hard slog. Basically, it was kind of like the drum and bass scene at that time was so strong in Wellington. You know, like people would put on like an international drum and bass guest on Tuesday night, and there'd be lines out the door because that's what students went to, you know. And I didn't really understand it at the time. I guess I felt a bit like it wasn't fair. Why does everyone like this music and not the music that I like? But I came to understand it, I think, where like these kids are like Wellington's a big student town, right? So these kids are coming from a small town like I did when I moved to Auckland, and then they're going to a club and having their first experience of maybe going out, taking pills, whatever, going to this rave. And the soundtrack to that is drum and bass. So that's the same way that I got into house music, you know? So it's kind of natural that grows the scene. Going back to what I was saying about when you have a bunch of small parties with no one there, like for house music, you don't really grow the scene. You don't get people that excited about it. If that's their first experience, they're like, oh, maybe I should go to this drum and bass show on a Tuesday night. It's going to be sick, you know? But anyway, yeah, so I kind of carried on doing that. And then I was working in like a corporate job and got pretty burned out. And my wife and I, my girlfriend at the time, decided we were going to go for a year, like working holiday kind of thing. The She wanted to go to Europe, and I was like, if we're going to Europe, we've got to go to Berlin. Seemed like a good idea. So we came for a 1-year working holiday in 2012 and have been here ever since. It's a long
Okay.
year. Yeah.
Yeah. I always thought you had, for some reason, I don't know why I thought this, but I always thought with where you've ended up now that there was an actual decision to move to Berlin to pursue a career in music.
No, it was just,
That
it was
wasn't the
really
intention.
like, I mean, at the time when we moved to Berlin, it was so cheap. We were paying, like our rent, we were paying per month was about the same as the rent we were paying in Wellington per week. And like the cost of groceries and things like that, it's changed a lot, especially since the pandemic. But at that time, like the cost of groceries was like a quarter of what it was in New Zealand. It was just like, so because I'd had like a real job. I had like, and I'd been pretty responsible with my money. I had a bunch of money saved up. So at least for that year, that first year that I was here, I didn't really have to work as long as I was living pretty frugally. So it gave me the opportunity to start getting some gigs. And yeah, things just kind of, it was kind of easy. I felt like that coming into that situation, just with the kind of economic situation, just gave us a lot of freedom to be able to make choices that we probably wouldn't be able to otherwise. Yeah, and we enjoyed the way of life, so it just kind of, yeah, it's kind of become home
I,
now.
well, it has to. You've got kids now, right? Or a kid,
Got a
should
kid,
I
yeah,
say?
yeah.
Got a kid, yeah.
Hmm.
Then you own a property there, or so you're
No,
pretty settled?
no.
No,
Um,
too expensive.
yeah, I mean, the time when we moved here, property prices were so low. Um, that's all changed quite a lot. But yeah, also the property market is very different to New Zealand. Um, won't go into it, but yeah, and also like the lending environment. It's for me as a self-employed artist, it's you're not the most desirable customer. Um,
Yeah, sure.
yeah, but anyway,
Mm.
it's
So,
something we might look at doing. But
so you're obviously a self-employed artist,
yeah,
so your job title technically would be audio engineer, I presume, because that's what you do mostly now. There, all right? Or
I mean, I do. I do a lot of different things, basically.
yeah,
So,
okay.
um, yeah. I mean, what do you want me to break it down? What I?
Well, I think that the intention behind my question is more so because the people that listen to this podcast are generally people who have not made a career out of music
Yeah, yeah,
and would probably like to make a career out of music, albeit they're all, the majority of my audience is Australia and New Zealand. So the opportunities for people in New Zealand are probably a lot smaller than there are in Berlin, arguably. But I guess you've obviously made a full career out of this, which
mm.
is respectable in anyone's eyes that are listening to this podcast. So give us a bit of an overview on what you do, within reason, and sort of maybe give us an idea on how you've got to do that.
Yeah. I mean, okay. So it basically comes back to when I moved here. Um, Kind of not having to go and get a job straight away. Excuse me, which gave me the freedom to try my hand at other things. But eventually, I needed to make an income to pay the bills and whatnot. Um, so I started doing that, I guess, by like any means necessary. So I was doing a lot of DJ gigs. I was doing, and then I kind of, I guess my production started getting better. I started signing things to labels, and I started signing some things to some local Berlin-based labels. Through some of those connections, I got more DJ gigs. I also got opportunities to like help people with engineering, so working on their music, which, like looking back, my rates that I was charging were pretty abysmal, but it was like I was happy to have the opportunity. So it was really kind of hustling anyway, by all means possible, just trying to pay the bills. And I guess like I just kind of like leaned into that through the years. I've also dabbled with like promoting parties. I guess the promoting thing I don't really do anymore. It was Berlin. While it's like I was saying, it's bigger. It's got much bigger population base than say Wellington, for example. But it's also super competitive. So you do end up with a lot of the kind of like the big clubs will be rammed. Like Berkane will have, you've seen the photos on Instagram and stuff, like, 500 people waiting outside for 12 hours or something. And there's also a bunch of smaller clubs that are half full. That's just, I guess that's the way things are. But I mean, we did some, I guess I was doing promoting for 4 or 5 years. Had some built up some cool things. But in the end, I was like, promoting shows wasn't my passion. My passion really is writing music and DJing. So I kind of like leaned into the engineering, ghostwriting thing, whatever you want to call it. Made good contacts through that. I still do it a bit. So I kind of have that as a revenue stream. Then in the pandemic, obviously all the DJ shows disappeared. So I guess it was like DJing was like my main income. And then that was like a supplementary kind of thing. And then during the pandemic, obviously the DJing kind of disappeared. And I thought, what am I going to do? So I was so I'd actually, the year before the pandemic, my touring schedule had been kind of ramping up, and I was kind of thinking, oh, maybe I'm going to stop engineering for people. And I was planning to kind of like tell some of my bigger clients that it's over, guys. You better look for someone else. And thank God I didn't do that, because like it really got me through the pandemic. It really, it just helped pay the bills, Then while the pandemic was going on, I kind of was like scrambling a little bit with what can I do? How long is this going to go on for? Kind of realizing that DJing is maybe not the most secure career path in terms of like, I mean, I get, hopefully there's not going to be a global pandemic every couple of years, but when something like that happens, it's a bit volatile. Everything disappears, right? So I realized I needed to kind of diversify my revenue streams and that type of thing. I had some friends that were doing quite well on YouTube, so I started making YouTube videos. By this stage, I'd got pretty good at music production, I think, and decided that, well, it wasn't like an easy decision. It was more of like a panic decision, really. Not kind of thinking I'm super good at this, people will be lucky to hear what I've got to say. More like, shit, I've got to do something maybe this can help me, help me survive, right? So I started putting out videos. They were pretty shit, but slowly it built up. Unfortunately, it didn't, well, I mean, whatever, but it didn't bear any fruit until long after the pandemic had finished. But it's, I've grown like a pretty solid community through YouTube and Patreon and this kind of thing. So that is now a pretty decent chunk of my revenue. I also have done a bunch of other things kind of around the production sphere to like I was going back to kind of my fear during the pandemic. I realized like it was really important to diversify my revenue. If I was just relying on DJing, it didn't have the security that I needed and perhaps doesn't have the longevity. I think if you can kind of look at any person who's had a long-standing DJ career, and they have ebbs and flows where, for whatever reason, they're like hot, they're getting lots of shows, they're getting big paydays, and then maybe the music that they write goes out of fashion, or the sound that they play goes out of fashion, and the promoters aren't knocking as they once did, and the fees aren't as big as they once were, So there's a level of inconsistency just built into DJing, right? As a revenue stream, as an income. So I made like a sample pack, which has was like super successful, and having the platform that I'd built on YouTube to promote that meant that it did like exceptionally well. It's still, I think I released that 2 years ago, and it's still the best selling sample pack from this, like month on month, from this sample pack label that I released it with. What am I talking about? I
talking about your revenue streams.
That's right. Yeah. So then I've gone on to do other things in the education sphere. Like I did a masterclass with Fader Pro last year, which was pretty well received. Also, again, didn't hurt that I had built this platform on YouTube to promote that through. And then I've got a bunch of things in the pipeline that I'm going to do this year, like probably starting a record label, a few different things, just to kind of, again, further diversify those revenue streams, because it allows me to, I've got a family. I'm not the youngest guy in the game, and I've got responsibilities. I'm an adult, and I need to like pay the bills, So yeah, but it also allows me to do what I'm passionate about.
Yeah, which is really important, and I guess I suppose that the take-home message from what you've done is that, I guess when I see social media, right, which is what people pay the most attention to, what do you see? You see the biggest artists constantly getting gigs, and you're only seeing small snippets of their shows. You're not actually seeing behind the scenes. You're not seeing anything. You're not seeing any struggles. You're not seeing the sleepless nights. The all the jet lag that they experience, the shit nutrition that they have to endure whilst they're on tour. You're not seeing any of the stress. You're just seeing them play shows. What does it feel like when you play a show? It's absolutely awesome. It's the best feeling in the world. And I guess a lot of these younger DJs and producers, I'm scared that they're getting the impression that a touring DJ is the most ideal dream job in the world.
Mate, it's tough. Like when I saw you at Shipwrecked, right? I'd flown out that morning from Melbourne. So I was in Melbourne that week. I'd played some shows in Australia and spent a few days in Melbourne, recording some music, working on some music with some people, and then had a show on the Friday night in Melbourne. I'd been kind of getting on top of my jet lag and trying to kind of have my schedule as kind of regimented as possible. The Friday morning in Melbourne, I woke up at 4:30 a.m. after having about 4 hours sleep, already like on the back foot, right? So that day, I've got a bunch of things organized, people to meet up with. I've got like a photo shoot with a photographer. I've got like artist dinners for that thing, for the show that night. So there's no time for sleeping. But I'm already on the back foot. I've got a show that I played at 3 a.m. I finish at 5 a.m. I've got to pick up from my hotel to go to the airport at 9 a.m. to catch my flight to New Zealand. So I need to be up at 8:30, something like that. So I think I got back from the show, maybe an hour and a half sleep. So that was my sleep for the night, right? So I'd had 4.5 the night before, an hour and a half the Friday night, get up, go to the airport. Sleeping on planes is difficult at the best of times, for me anyway. I think in the flight from Melbourne to Auckland, I lost a couple of hours from the time difference, and I managed to maybe get like 1 hour's sleep. So I landed in Auckland left in the morning and landed at 5 p.m. or something. Got picked up, 2-hour drive to Shipwrecked Festival. Got to Shipwrecked, had to get myself situated and find out my accommodation and that kind of thing. So I thought maybe I was going to get a disco nap before my set. Didn't quite happen. So by the time I saw you, I'd had I was like 2.5 days in and had 6.5 hours sleep, 7 hours sleep in that time. It was so fun, don't get me wrong, but like after that I was exhausted. And that's not even that, that's pretty normal. I'm not like someone who's flying different continents like over 4 times in a week. Like some people do way more than I do, and it's tough at my level, or it can be tough at my level. I think some of these like really big artists, it must be so intense to have their schedules.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, I was talking to Josh Butler about this because he came on the podcast last year, and he was sort of talking to me a little bit about it and the downsides of the touring life in a sense. And of course, it has its perks, but he did say, I'm only in my mid-30s, and I'm going to have to pack this in at some point. There's no way I can carry on doing this like Ricardo Villalobos for the rest of my life. There has to be a point where you cap it off. And I mean, I suppose one of the questions, the two-part question, I guess, is do you think the touring lifestyle will take its toll and that you'll finish that up eventually? And secondly, on a different matter, when you are sleep deprived and you turn up to a show, is your performance hindered in any way? Because I know that when I play a gig, and it's pretty rare that I play a gig, right? But when I do play a gig, I put so much effort into thinking and paying attention to what the next track should be for that particular moment. And if I was sleep deprived and I was like 5 days into a tour, I don't think I'd be able to do that very effectively.
I mean, it's hard to say one way or the other, right? Because say looking at that Shipwrecked show, that's how it was. So I don't have the perspective of saying, oh, actually the year before when I played, I was a lot more fresh, let's say. I feel like both went well. This year I felt a little bit more on autopilot, but I think that's part of it. It's like your performance is partly based on your, like, what you're doing in the moment, but a lot of it is based on the preparation that you do, the years of experience beforehand, the hunting for records, knowing your music, kind of like having prepared a playlist of music. So I mean, I call it a playlist, but because that's how it's described in Record Box. but like a folder of music, a selection of music to select tracks from. So kind of, yeah, just knowing that stuff, I do like a lot of mental preparation, thinking through like scenarios of like, what if this happens? What if that happens? And then I'll prepare for a few different scenarios so I can kind of like go off on this tangent or that tangent depending on what's working in the night. So it's a lot of preparation goes into it. That means that when those situations present themselves, like I'm in the position to perform as good as I can. If I'd not been prepared and had come in and got on the piss, things could have gone quite differently. And in the end, like I was really happy with like the set I played, and the feedback that I got from people was great. So, which is like awesome. But it could have gone another way if I had done things differently, So I think, yeah.
The set that you played was awesome, and I suppose another question on the back of that is, you mentioned to me that you weren't too sure how it was going to go because you were following DeWalter, who'd obviously he has a very specific music style. His set was fantastic, but I love minimal, so it really suited my music taste. For the newer DJs out there who may not get the opportunity to play a night where all the lineup is playing the same kind of music as them, and they may have to play after someone who plays completely different music to them, and you obviously kind of had that experience at Shipwrecked, how would you say that someone should approach that? Is there a specific thing that you do to prepare for when you come on? Do you stand there and get in the mood, feel out the vibe? Like, what was your thought process in that moment?
I mean, going back to what I just said about preparation, I had prepared a kind of separate folder of music to maybe play a little bit more closely aligned to what DeWalter was playing, or because it seemed to be that the night kind of naturally progressed in that niche or genre of house music. And then I really like that kind of stuff, and I play that kind of stuff, but it's not exactly my sound, so it kind of looked like it took a bit of a shift, or that maybe I was a bit of a wild card in that thing. So I went onto the stage kind of in the background half an hour before my set time to just kind of feel things out, look at how things were going, observe the crowd, and try to kind of make a decision of what I was going to do. And I think it's important to make that decision, be confident about it, go with it, but also be ready to kind of be flexible, so I wasn't kind of like going, oh, maybe I'll just try this and I'll just do what or going like, fuck this is what I plan, I do what I want. It's kind of somewhere in between, I mean, I've seen I've booked DJs who have done that and like literally cleared a club. And I think I try to really not be the kind of guy that plays with my ego. I'm there to facilitate the party. So I want to do that while presenting music that I believe in, right? So that's the approach I take, or the philosophy that I take towards it, and it seems to work most of the time.
Yeah. And to be fair, when you get to your level, where you're touring and you're playing, and you're getting booked for big shows and you're headlining, it's very rare that you're going to come across that situation anyway, right?
Yeah.
So, well, I would hope so.
I mean, you'd be surprised. Like it. I mean, the show I played in Sydney, it was a cool show, but the guys before me, like I'm kind of like, they booked me as the headliner based on the music that I play and release and whatnot. The guys who played before me were like banging tech house, like 130 BPM and like pretty cheesy-ish. I'm just like, I don't like to be a diva, but I had to go and say to them, like, guys, can you just tone this shit down a bit, because it's just not going to work. And I feel like that's a bit of like what I was saying about preparation and trying to look at the night and trying to play your position in the night, right? I think those guys potentially didn't do that. They didn't go like, oh, well, this is what he's going to probably play, so let's tailor what we're going to play to lead into that, because the most important people at this show are the audience. And that's the kind of mindset that I try to take when I'm playing.
Okay. It's crazy to hear that, to be honest, Dylan, because I mean, I guess when I used to go out partying at the weekends at places like Sankey's and Mission and Fabric in England, I'm talking maybe like 2006, 7, 8, before I moved to New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
There was never a case of ups and downs with music during the night. The entire night was almost choreographed, where you could walk in at opening time and that it would be deep, really slow, and the energy would naturally just go like this. It would be a bell curve throughout the night. It would peak at somewhere at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and then it would be brought down naturally. And that's basically what all the DJs knew what they were doing. They understood each other, and they knew what their job was at that particular time of the night.
Mm-hmm.
That's how a club night should go,
yeah.
right, in my opinion. So it's crazy to even hear that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's more common these days. I feel like promoters book people and put them in. They will create like a lineup or a timetable. And I'm not saying this is what happened at Shipwrecked at all, but I think Shipwrecked is pretty well curated. But like, I'll play on lineups where it's pretty clear that they've put the DJs in an order of kind of hierarchy of notoriety rather than any consideration of music style. So it's weird, man. It doesn't, like, my whole philosophy for it is like about curating a night, not like building up a lineup based on the number of Instagram followers or something, like peaking at this guy who's got 200,000 followers. Like,
but that's the way it goes these days, isn't it, man? I mean, I don't know. I mean, when we started DJing, there was no such thing as Instagram, so I never really got a chance to experience it. But it must have been I mean, I don't want to get into this topic now because it's a massive topic to get into, but the transition that you've had to go through in your career, going from no social media to being the only and main way that you have to promote yourself. And granted, it's a fantastic way to promote yourself. I've never really got to grips with it myself personally. I think it's my downfall, but it must have been quite a difficult shift.
Oh, mate, it continues to be a daily battle. Let's say it's like I feel like I've never gotten on top of it. I try to really like mentally like stop the negativity that I like. Ultimately, if I'm just being totally honest about how I feel about social media, I wish it wasn't there. It's not a thing that I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about music. I'm passionate about writing music. I'm passionate about playing music. I'm passionate about collecting and digging for music. And I'm passionate about sharing that music with people, right? I do that somewhat on my social media, but I'm not passionate about social media. I'm not passionate about playing it up to the camera. I don't want to be on Big Brother or something. I'm not I don't want to be a celebrity. I want to be someone who shares music and shares their passion for music. So I guess you can use social media in that way, but it can be, I think when you're focused on clicks and likes and all of this stuff, it can, if you're not careful, it can you can follow that rather than follow your passion and follow your, but then from a practical sense, I really try to kind of go, well, that's not the way it is. I don't have the option of going, I don't like social media, therefore I'm not going to do it, right? So I try to lean into it on my own terms, right? So what I've in terms of like the music I write, the shows I play, and the way I do social media, in the last, I guess, kind of since the pandemic, I really decided I want to do things authentically for me. I don't want to tailor the music that I'm writing to try and get in the charts or get on this label or that label. I want to write stuff that I'm passionate about. And if that resonates with people, great. And the same with social media. I'm myself on there, maybe I'm a weird introverted guy who likes music, but that's me, whatever, So I've had booking agents and managers and shit tell me oh, you need to buy some followers. If you had 50K followers on Instagram, you'd be bigger. I've got, I'm very modest Instagram following, but all those people are there authentically because they appreciate my music. And I put out a video where I'm talking to the camera about my new release or something, and I get interaction and I get engagement on my social media that people with 10 times the number of followers as me don't have, because they're not authentic fans, I guess, and I think that's something that I've been really I've just tried to stay really strong about, not chasing the numbers, but just being authentic. It doesn't benefit me to have a bunch of vanity metrics on my social media. If I use it as a platform to engage with people that want to engage with me, then that's the best thing I can do with it, right? And if I just be myself, I'm not Fisher. He's perfect for social media. But if I try and be like Fisher, I'll come across as some dickhead that's trying to be like Fisher. That's not me. So all I can do is be me and hope that resonates with the people who like my music. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, no. Whether it answers my question or not, it was beautiful, man. I think that's such a refreshing and awesome thing to hear. Just because this is the way I feel as well. Even though I've not made a career out of it, and I probably won't. I just think you hit the nail on the head with these people that buy social media following. What's the use in that? It's just a number. Yes, some promoters might latch onto the number, but really, I mean, if you look deeper into it and you actually look into what's going on there, you can tell from a mile off. It's pretty common these days what people are doing. So the fact that you've remained authentic, and I think authenticity is the strongest trait anyone can have, and really living in that is an awesome thing.
I mean,
so that's really good to hear.
It's funny, in some different territories, it's also here in Europe, it's not as intense, but in South America, it's I'll play shows and the warm-up DJ has got 150,000 followers. Granted, they've got huge populations there, but it's it doesn't translate, and like you're saying, you look at their page and they've got 150,000 followers. They say, hey, I'm doing this tonight and 3 people like it. And then, I don't know. So, but those territories are also, the promoters are very focused on those metrics, right? So it's kind of, I don't know. I feel like there's, I don't know, it's such a complicated topic. Like maybe I could get a short-term win, like if I don't know, boosted those numbers. But I don't think it's actually like, it's not fostering those relationships. It's fostering some kind of image, which I don't know. I don't feel like it's got longevity.
Hmm. And if it's abrasive to who you are and what you stand for, why would you do it? You know, I don't. I think there's nothing worse, especially when you get to our age. I mean, I'm approaching 40. I think you're probably around the same age. I'm not about
I'm 25.
Oh,
No, I'm not.
I'm glad you didn't fool me then. I know how old you are.
Yeah.
You just, I think when you get to our age, you're not trying to please anyone anymore. You know, you've got your friends, you've got your family, you know who you are to a degree. I think we can always learn more about ourselves, but I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone anymore. So I don't need social media following to make music. You know, I don't need social media following to prove that I'm a decent DJ. You know, I don't need that. And you obviously don't either, but I suppose the pressure comes when you get to your level.
Well, like I said, I mean, I think you're only doing yourself a disservice if you know, if your goal is to, even like, as I said, like having some kind of altruistic goal, like just to share your passion with people, you kind of need to lean into social media a bit. You're only doing yourself a disservice by completely abstaining from it. But I think there's a balance to be found where you're being authentic and like using it as a tool rather than using that as the main focus. I know that's the way I view it, because I feel like if my days turned into making TikToks rather than making music, I'm like,
Please
what
do it.
what the hell am I doing? You know, like why am I making sacrifices to then end up, you know, and through why have I made the sacrifices that I've made in order to get to the position where I am, if I end up then doing something that I'm not passionate about? You know, it's crazy. But
Yeah, it's
I mean, the thing is, there's a whole generation of people that have grown up with these apps, and they're being authentic to themselves because they are passionate about it, I guess.
Yeah. And that's also a really good perspective to have. Try to understand it from their level, because they don't understand life without it. So I guess you've kind of got to empathize in some way, shape, or form, even if we don't fully understand it.
Yeah.
But I do want to sort of change tact a little
Cool.
bit here to the music production side of things, because I think we can probably get stuck on this promoting as a DJ forever, and you know there's a lot to be said about it. But you know, I know you mostly for your productions, and I think the reason for that is because you've done pretty well in the music production space, and you've had plenty of, you know, stuff in the top 10 of the Beatport charts over and over again. I constantly see these things popping up, and you're always there. And your productions sound fantastic. And I know that you don't get those mixed by anyone else. And I guess, when did you actually start producing? Was it when you were in Wellington?
I mean, actually, I think the first time I experimented with production was maybe around 2005. I had some friends that were making hip hop beats. I got a cracked copy of Reason off them and started messing around with it. Most of so this is just like a little sidebar, but this, I just remember this being so funny. Like most of the DJ mixes didn't have that good of effects on them at the time, right? So like the Pioneer DJ mixers had like a filter, but it was in the kind of main master output effects, and it was like a filter sweep, so it kind of did this kind of thing. So I remember trying to make music in Reason and grabbing this filter device and going, what the fuck is this thing? Like, why is it not making this sound that I want? So that's how rudimentary my knowledge of production was. Like, while I'd been collecting music, and I didn't really have an understanding of what went into making up a track, right? And there was so much, the resources were so much more limited then. Like, I'd buy future music and computer music and read something about what Laurent Garnier was doing in his studio. Oh, wow. Okay, so I need $100,000 bank loan so I can buy a room full of synths. But so I think like the culmination of that was I made like a couple of tracks, and then I kind of put it to the side. And again, around 2009, 2010, when I got back into DJing, I got into production. I think because it was what I was familiar with, I got Reason, and that lasted like a couple of weeks. I was like, this is a nightmare. And then found Ableton and started learning that, and just slowly went from there. I think I didn't do this intentionally, but I think looking back, one of the most important decisions I made, or habits that I formed, was finishing my tracks. So I'd start something and I'd just kind of finish it. I'd make it into a track. It wasn't good. But that's an approach I've taken to this day, is like, I try to finish as many tracks as I can. Cause I do another thing, going back to like the ways that I make money and that kind of thing, and what I do in this sphere. I mentor a lot of people and kind of do coaching and things for a lot of people as well. And this is something that I'm constantly telling people, is like, a piece of music, even like the worst track, has infinitely more value than a loop with the most potential, because that terrible track can still get signed to a label, can still get played by a DJ. No one's going to sign your 16-bar loop, and no one's going to play your 16-bar loop, right? So turn it into a track. If it's not a good track, forget it, move on to the next one. But make tracks, don't make loops, So I somehow unintentionally kind of fostered this habit in myself that I made tracks. So the benefit of that is you're practicing each part of the process. You're practicing generating ideas, arranging, mixing, like finalizing the track, and I think focusing on all of those steps rather than just making loops helped me to progress. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's been a long journey for me. Some people start out, 2 years later, they blow up. I don't feel like I've blown up. Despite the success that you were mentioning before, I'm super grateful for all of that. But I don't feel like I had some moment where I just exploded and had some kind of crossover hits. It's been a very gradual process, and that's my journey. Everyone's journey is different,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and to be fair, even if you did have that explosion, is that really what you wanted, like, in the first place? Would you really want that pressure? I mean, the money would be good, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But I mean, you've mentioned there, obviously, it's been a long slog for you. Has there been moments over those years where you've had to take a step back from music production because you've kind of burnt yourself out? Have you gone up and down, or has it just been a constant kind of trajectory?
I mean, yes and no. Like, there's never been a time where I've gone like, oh, I can't do this, because I'm genuinely passionate about it. It's genuinely what I love doing. It's to my own detriment to a point. Like, I come in the morning to my studio and there's emails that I should respond to, and there's things that I should do for. I guess I should be making some TikToks and whatnot, but I sit down and I write music. You know what I mean? That's what I do. That's what I love. That's what I'm passionate about, and I think, yeah, I I love it. So there's times when like the career aspects of it have been frustrating, and I guess to a certain degree continue to be. But just accepting that that's part of it. That at its core, I'm doing what I love, and I'm incredibly lucky to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I used to, I guess, before things had kind of come together, I used to think about that concept of like needing a hit to like make my career. If I had like a hit on this label or that label, I'd get more bookings, I'd get higher DJ fees, I'd be earning more revenue from my music. And at the time, I was really struggling. So, not struggling, but there were months where I was like, how's the rent going to get paid? Everything always worked out, but it was, there's been ups and downs for sure. But funnily enough, it was when I stopped chasing that and kind of started going, because that was something that kind of burned me out a little bit, was trying to like play this game of like, oh, if I write a track that sounds like this, maybe I'll get signed to this label or that label. And those labels were often the labels that were popping at the time, not the label whose music I was playing in my DJ sets or whose music I was passionate about. It was like maybe the label that had just released the latest number one on Beatport or something like that. And it's like, if I was that artist on that label, then my life situation would be better or something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah.
When I kind of changed my mindset to go like, fuck all of that, I'm just going to focus on writing the music that I love, things started happening. Like I started getting signed to the labels that I love. I started working with artists that I like. I've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of my heroes, and have a lot of the people who I look up to in the scene like support my music. And yeah, so that all happened when I decided to be more authentic to myself and authentic with what I'm doing in the studio. And the kind of the way obviously you can't just exist in a vacuum. You have to take other things into consideration. Like one of the things the way I look at writing my music these days is like, how's this going to work on the dance floor? How does it work for the crowd? How does it fit into my set? That type of thing. Not what label can this get signed to? Who's going to play it? Will it be a Beatport number one or any of that kind of shit? So I'm trying to think of it in terms of like a functional way, like how can I use this as a tool in my sets, but also how can it connect with people? Yeah. And what does it communicate from me? Yeah.
That's a really good way to look at it, and I guess I can relate to you in a way because I've gone through this. I've not released a lot of music. In fact, I've been very reserved with getting my music out there. And the reason for that, and which is part of my next question, is I've heard a lot of producers at the top of their game say, "Don't be so eager to get stuff out there so early on in your music production career." And I've kind of taken that, and I've made sure that I haven't rushed into releasing things, because if I listen back to some of the stuff I was making 2 years ago, I'm just glad I didn't release it. It's not great.
Yeah.
And So, I mean, what was the period that you waited? Like, how long were you making music before you actually got to a point where you were kind of like, actually, this is release worthy?
The first track I had released, like the mix was so bad that I had to send the track to the label without a kick drum because the kick drum I was using was so bad and so badly mixed that the mastering engineer couldn't actually master it properly. So
Oh, wow.
they asked me to take the kick drum out and send them the pre-master without a kick drum so they could put a kick in. And like I was pretty eager to get stuff out there. And this is, again, going back to this like coaching stuff that I do, this is advice that I'm giving people often, is like at that time, and I think like every new aspiring producer, they're like, I need to release music because they see the people they look up to releasing music, and this is what moves the needle forward for them, right? But releasing shitty music on a shitty label doesn't actually move your needle forward. It doesn't make you, if you're like a lot of people are releasing music as a promotional tool to try and get DJ gigs. It's fine, that's the way it is. If I come to you as a promoter and say, hey, I'm unknown DJ X and I've released this shitty track on unknown label X, you don't go like, wow, would you like to come and play at my show? I'd love to give you some, like, I'd love to pay you lots of money. It just doesn't work like that, you know? And then in the same way, I can't go to, I don't know, Hot Creations or Drum Code or some, you know, one of these crosstown rebels, a big top tier label, and go like, by the way, guys, here's my new demo I've released on shitty label X. You may know me. Like it there's a point where actually I think that can be detrimental to your image, right? Like, oh, this guy has released a bunch of shitty music on a bunch of shitty labels. Like, it almost can taint your image a little bit. So I think finding, and that is literally the road that I took. I released lots of shitty music on lots of shitty labels. Anyone that would take it, basically, I just threw it out there. But at some point, I realized that wasn't helping me. So I tried to be a bit more curated about who I was working with and what I was putting out there. So the advice that I give to people is don't be in a rush and don't feel like you have to try and work your way up from the bottom, because that's such a long, like as a new producer, you're generally very enthusiastic, maybe overly confident, until it comes time to, like, maybe for your first couple of tracks, you're like, I'm going to sign this shit to Drum Code. I'm going to sign this to Piv or whatever. And then you try that and you don't hear back. So then you start getting like a bit disheartened maybe. And then you're like, oh, I'll just send this to some like lowest rung on the ladder label. And then you think you're going to work your way up from there. But those like lowest rung labels don't actually create any traction for you. So the advice I give to people is like, do send your stuff to Drum Code. Then send it to the next label down, then send it to the next label down. So if you're working from the top down, it's much more likely that you're going to like land at some middle rung on the ladder label than the bottom rung on the ladder. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes complete
But I
sense.
think a lot of people think I've got to start at the bottom and then slowly work my way up. Like, I think that path doesn't necessarily lead to Drum Code.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I completely agree. And, you know, I've been through it myself. And what you've said there is exactly my thought process throughout the last 4 years. It's like, oh, I've made these loops and these couple of tracks in the first 6 months, and these need to be released on this label. And in reality, you know, I'm glad I didn't do that. And I've released on a couple of labels. I think one of them's a medium-ish sounds label, which some decent artists are releasing on. But even I listen back to that now and I'm like, that wasn't ready to be released. I shouldn't have done that.
I mean, the music is so disposable these days. There's so much of it coming out. I mean, I would advise people to try and write timeless music, but music, there's so much of it. So I think like waiting or like trying to achieve perfection, it's just not possible, you know. So I mean, you can be curated in the music that you release and the sound that you put out there, but in terms, especially in the production process, I try to I try to take the approach myself. I just write a lot of music. I try to finish a lot of tracks. A lot of those are shit. Still to this day, I write a lot of shitty tracks, and it's kind of like, you know, you've got to dig a lot of dirt to get to the gold. Is kind of the way I try to look at it. So I just, or like, yeah, I feel like I try to look at it like I've just got to write those shitty tracks so that I can get them out of the way, and then the good one can come along. Because I think I see a lot of people getting really hung up on it, going, "Oh, this track's not good enough. I need to make it better." That every track represents an idea, right? Maybe it wasn't a good idea. Get it out of the way so you can get on to the next one, which maybe it's going to be a good idea.
Yeah, I agree. And I actually did. I've done it a couple of times now. I don't know if you've ever experimented with this, but I I told myself I would make a loop every single day for 1 month,
Mm-hmm.
and I did that. And what I realized is that, you know, out of the 30 odd loops that I made that particular month as an experiment, I got two decent tracks out of it. And those are two decent tracks that I've still got that I do intend to release at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the thing. It's kind of like sales, you know, it's like I work in the sales world, and, you know, you've got to churn through a lot of numbers to find the gold, just like you've said.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes you might find one out of 100, but the fact that you found one
Mm-hmm.
that's ready to be released and a decent track is better than finding none in the first place.
I mean, I think you've kind of like hit the nail on the head there. In my experience, like focusing on quantity over quality, especially in the kind of idea creation phase, is actually more efficient. So, like if I'm approaching a remix or something, I might start 2, 3 versions, 4 versions, 5 versions. I'll try and do those really, really quickly, just working on trying to get the fundamentals of an idea down, and then select the one that has the most potential, that I can see as probably coming together with the best end result, but also having the path of least resistance to get it to a finished track. Because like I said, a loop with a lot of potential has got no value. Only a finished track has value. You know, I can't submit a loop to this label that's asked me to do a remix. I need to give them a track, you know. So that's literally part of my workflow and creative process, is making a bunch of loops. I try to be very strategic and kind of time focused in that, and just go like, I'm going to make 6 loops in this day or this 2 days or whatever. You know, spending an hour or so on each one, and then just listen back to them. Go, this one's got the best. This one's the best. I'm going to focus on that. And at that point, I make that shit into a track. Maybe that's not the best track, but you know what I mean? Like I'm generating. I'm making music. I'm not like messing around and second guessing myself.
And every time you do delve down that creative process, even if it doesn't turn into a full track, you're still testing your skills, you're still learning new things. And if you actually experiment and don't go through the motions and what you would usually do and try new things, that's when you actually come up with happy mistakes.
Yeah,
And that's
100%.
when you learn new processes. And yeah, so completely agree with that. One last question on the production side of things is something that I'm quite intrigued about, because it's an area over the last 3 or so years that I've delved into and kind of made a swift move back from, actually, hardware versus just in the box type stuff. And maybe you've been through this yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I believed at one point rightly or wrongly, that I needed some hardware to make, to get me off the computer screen. And it did. And I had some hardware. I really enjoyed it. I made some fantastic music with it. But what I then realized was actually I'm a little bit more efficient when I do use the computer, and I can get stuff done quicker, and I've got less technical issues. And yeah, it might not be as fun, so to speak. But have you been down that route? Have you been down the hardware route, and how did you find it?
Yeah, I mean, I've I've bought and sold a lot of things over the years. I still find myself having those thoughts that, like, oh, maybe if I had this, then X or Y. Maybe my song would be better. Or for me, I can only speak for myself personally. This is my most important piece of hardware. Is my mouse. Like I've got a few outboard synths here. If I look around the studio, I've got 3 or 4 that are unplugged. I've got a tape machine in the background there, which is unplugged. I've got
Do you use it though for mixing?
No, it's not plugged in. I've got a SSL Fusion mastering thing, which I do use for mastering. I've got a hardware synth that I use here, but it's like 99% of the time I reach for a plugin. They're so good these days. I know what I'm doing. I can get my idea down quickly, and I guess for me, I don't feel like I've got a problem with coming up with ideas. That doesn't mean I don't get stuck, but I feel like I've got too many ideas for records that I want to make that I don't have time in the day to make them, so anything that's kind of slowing that process down, I try to eliminate, and that has kind of been hardware. I think, yeah, if you enjoy working with it, do it. If it helps you be creative, do it. I'm really focused on the path of least resistance, because at the end of the day, what I want is to finish more tracks. I feel like that's my method, right? And I think sometimes having some hardware can help me do that. I also found there's like this kind of paradox where often you'll play a synth with this like piece of analog equipment and then process it with a bunch of digital plugins, and it's like, at that point, is it analog or is it digital? Like, yeah, I don't know.
It's a fair point. Yeah.
I think each to their own, but anyone who is listening and thinking, do I need hardware to make great music? No. The answer is absolutely, fundamentally no. You can make amazing music with just the core plugins that are in any DAW, whether that's Cubase, Reason, Logic, Ableton, whatever. You don't need anything.
And if those of you out there are concerned about your track not sounding analog enough, which in times I have done that, exactly that, I have then gone and get that mixed by someone who has analog gear, just to run it through some analog gear if you really want to do that. I mean, do you think that makes a difference or what?
No, to be honest.
No.
I think you're attributing, I don't mean this to sound condescending, but I think you're probably attributing sounding analog enough with sounding good enough. Like, you're probably going like, my track doesn't sound as good as I want it to sound, and then going, that must be because I'm not using analog equipment. Therefore, if it sounds more analog, it will be better. I mean, I don't know.
Really, you could just learn more, right? You could just learn more. You could just practice more, and you could just understand music a little bit more, and that might just get you to where you want to be.
I think a lot of what people attribute to sounding analog is like things not sounding static. And you can do that in the digital domain with like, I use a lot of like Max for Live devices, a lot of like randomization tools and plugins and stuff like that to just create subtle movement in your sounds. And that creates like depth and this analogness that people want, you know? I think
put a phaser on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, man. And you know, some plugins are great these days. You know, the Slate Digital bundle's really good for the old modeled analog hardware. You know, if you really wanted to use that, I suppose. You know, obviously, because you do operate mostly inside the box. Is there any plugins that you do recommend for your creativity that might help some of the newer producers that are listening?
No. You don't need
Just
anything.
stick to the Ableton stuff.
Just make music with whatever you've got. You don't need anything. All you need is some discipline and some creativity, and to kind of get out of your own way. Stop second guessing yourself and just make some shit. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's good. Like if it's better than, if you're comparing yourself to you from 2 months ago, that's the best thing you can do. Try and get better. Try and get better than that person. You don't need to be better than East End Dubs or better than Jamie Jones or Patrice Baumel or Joris Vaughan or whoever you aspire to be like, you know. That person's on their own journey. So reference your journey when you're, yeah.
Those are some very, very wise words. And I mean, I've said this on previous podcasts that all you need is Ableton. You don't, you know, if you learn those synthesizers and those effects within Ableton, you actually don't need anything else.
Yeah.
And you can get stuck in a rut with plugins anyway, can't you? So
I will say, okay, if I have to put something on it, like what are the things that I use the most would be Diva, and I think one of the most fun, easy things for experimentation is Tantra.
Yep.
It's
Tantra's pretty cool.
Pretty overused, but if you turn the mixer knob down, it can kind of turn a static sound into something quite textural and interesting.
Yeah. And you can always resample it down and then splice it up and use those sounds for new things as well. So
exactly.
Yeah, completely agree. Dylan, we'll wrap it up there, man, because we've been going on for quite a while and we've covered so many different topics. And yeah. I've absolutely loved this chat. It's been fantastic just to delve into your brain and your journey. And it's just, do you know what it is? It's absolutely awesome to see yet another Kiwi that's made it work, whether this be overseas, you know, or not. You've made it work and you've made a full-time career out of it, and it's very respectable. And I'm sure that anyone else who's a fan of you in this country, and obviously you had quite a lot come to some of your gigs when you were back over here, I'm sure they would say the same thing. So it's been a fantastic chat. Thanks for coming on.
Nice one. Thanks for having me.
And what I'll do is I will link all your accounts. So your Beatport profile, where can they contact you for mixing and mastering? Because I presume that you've got a specific place you can go for that.
Yeah, so I've got a website where they can order things, Weekend Audio with WKND, Weekend Audio. Cool. You can order mixing and mastering through there. Little plug for myself. I actually had like one of my heroes contacting me last week, which was pretty surreal, for mixing advice.
Wow.
Mr. Guy J. Shout out Guy J. Yeah.
I'm sure
so that's pretty. No, he's not. So that's why I can feel comfortable telling people that he was asking me for mixing advice. But that was pretty surreal. But yeah, so if you want to get your tracks mixed, look me up.
Cool. Nice. And have you got any releases coming out in the near future?
Yeah, I've got. I've always got loads of releases. You can follow my Instagram and all that kind of thing to see what's coming up. Next thing, I've got a remix on Steve Bugg's label Sublease. I've got a single on Deep Palmer. I've got, there's loads of stuff. There's always loads of stuff. I've probably released too much music.
Never enough.
Yeah.
Okay, man. Well, I'll link everything in the description of this podcast below the video. And if everyone wants to go and check out Dilby's music and go and buy some music, I'm sure I really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks for calling on.
Oh, one quick point is
Go for it.
the set from Shipwreck that we're talking about. I will have a video of that on my YouTube channel soon. Just organising, getting
wicked.
that soon. So if anyone wants to see what
Cool.
Shipwreck's like, and go and check it out.
Yeah, and then everyone can buy early tickets for next year.
Yeah. I'm sure they'd be much appreciative of that.
I'm sure it would. Yeah.